and blessings to you all. Welcome to the first episode of Breaking the Bounds of Matter. Thank you so much for joining me, and I really appreciate your time in joining me on this very special moment for me, because this is a very, what I consider to be a very important milestone for many reasons, but more than anything, this is an episode where I would love to intimately share with you excerpts from my recently published book titled Breaking the Bounds of Matter. So in a series of videos that will follow this first episode, we'll be extracting different parts of the book and expand on them, and hopefully I get to hear your thoughts with regards to the topic that will be discussed on each particular day. So the topics won't be extracted in any particular order from the book. Rather, I will talk about each topic in a way that, for example, today's topic, which is called Oneness, was inspired by a series of events that made me think about a lot of concepts that are related to issues of unity. So most of the topics that will be extracted from the book per episode will be inspired by moment-to-moment experiences that will hopefully be, well expressed in a way that is understandable and simple. I'll try to be as simple as I can, whilst dissecting some of the topics that will be discussed now moving forward. So yeah, on that note, thank you so much for joining me. So part of the process of this exercise will be me reading some of the words from the book, or some of the chapters. I'll be reading some things here and there from a specific chapter from the book, and hopefully you can relate to some of the discussed topics. So yeah, that's the goal. And so without going into too much detail, let's get started. So today I chose chapter 7 of the book titled Oneness. So I will read, so don't mind me if you see my eyes, because I'm reading from a laptop. So what I'll do, I will read in what I think are important attributes from that particular chapter, and then I'll try to unpack as much as I can with regards to, in relation to whatever that I have read, from the chapter. So let's not waste any more time and go right into it. So the first paragraph, here it goes. Oneness is the idea that all things are connected and part of a single unified whole. It is a concept found in many spiritual and philosophical traditions. The concept of oneness suggests that all living beings are part of a larger interconnected system, and that our individual actions have an effect on the collective. The concept of oneness has been expressed in various forms throughout history, sometimes serving to justify oppressive systems and ideologies. For instance, during colonial times, European powers often justified their dominion over other cultures by claiming to bring them into a unified world order. This interpretation of oneness was used to ignore cultural differences and establish a false sense of unity. On the other hand, the concept of oneness has also been used to promote peace and understanding between different cultures. For example, in many spiritual traditions, oneness is seen as a way to connect with the divine and foster a sense of unity with all living things. This idea has been used to promote tolerance and acceptance between different people around the world. It is for this reason that we can infer that the idea of oneness encompasses a range of contrasting ideas that could be reflected in the diverse synonyms for the term. On the one hand, it encompasses the idea of individuality and distinctness, suggesting that each individual has its own unique identity and characteristics. On the other hand, it also encompasses the idea of wholeness and unity, suggesting that all individuals and things are part of a larger interconnected whole. The paradoxical nature of oneness is further emphasized by the concept's relationship with numbers. The polarity between the number 1 and 2 is significant, as it highlights the idea that 1 and 2 are not necessarily distinct or separate, Instead, it suggests that one can be repeated many times to create a larger whole without losing its essential character as one. Depending on how you look at it, you may view 1 and 2 as being separate entities or one expanded entity. This statement is likely referring to the concept of unity and duality in philosophy and spirituality. In some philosophical and spiritual traditions, the duality of existence, such as the distinction between mind and matter, is seen as an illusion, and ultimately everything is viewed as a single, unified entity. So, given that, having had that interpretation of the term oneness, I think one can relate to the statements, the mentioned statements, in different ways. So, for example, I used the concept of numbers, specifically the number 1 and 2, to exemplify the paradoxical nature of the concept of oneness. Why? Because if you think about it, without 1, you can't have 2, right? So for the number 2 to exist, one had to kind of like develop a pattern of repetition in order for it to expand itself. And that level of expansion, in order to make a kind of like a distinct difference, was labeled or called something different. And in this instance, it's called or referred to as 2. So now, depending on how you look at the number or how you relate to the concept of expansion, you may see 2 as like a distinct difference from 1. Like trait, you may see it as a concept that has a different characteristic, a different character or trait from the number 1. But in essence, if you really pay close attention, number 2 is practically identical to the number 1. It's just 1, which is like it's just the number 1 expanded. I don't know if that makes sense. And one could say the same about the number 3. Without 2, you cannot have 3. Without 3, you cannot have 4, right? And so the pattern repeats itself perpetually without end. So now imagine now if 2 or even 3 or even 4, the number 4 was disconnected or had a sense of separation from the origins of its unified version or the source of its beginning. In this case, the number 1, right? And imagine if the number 4 kind of like related to its existence as just as a singular individual entity that exists outside of a particular system. I think it would be quite troublesome because, first and foremost, as soon as the number 4, for example, starts having a certain perspective of that kind of separate individualism, the number 4 will be at a disadvantage, but for so many reasons. In terms of insight, how then will the number 4 have an ability to expand itself if it has no idea of the nature or the principles that guide the nature of its expansion? How will you continue if you do not know even the rules of engagement that would allow for a sense of continuity? In order for 4 to create the next level of expansion, it will have to understand how expansion takes place, and therefore it will have to understand how 3 created it, and how it might even have to go a bit back and say, okay, so before 3 there was 2. So what was the origin of 2? Where did 2 come from before the number 1? And so forth. So I think this is from a philosophical perspective. And by the way, this is just purely my own observations. This is everything that I will be mentioning or expressing are coming purely from my heart and experience. So I'm expressing some of these things purely based on my own personal experience You may not necessarily share the same sentiments. This is just based purely on my own personal experience. Besides, it will be a bit difficult, for me to share ideas outside of my own existence, because there's no better master of me than me, I don't know if that makes sense. So yes, so that's how basically the example that's been made in the book, for me, like as an added commentary, that's how I would kind of like try and describe it. So without one, we would not necessarily have the number system as we know it. So there is that kind of, I'm talking now basic, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a mathematician, but I'm just talking basic number system here, like just nothing deep. I'm sure if we could go deeper into the concept of numbers, we would find other interesting scenarios, but I just wanted us to purely focus on the number one, to kind of like break down the concept of oneness, as mentioned in the book. So let's continue reading. Sometimes I hear people say, what if people in that area are ahead? What does it have to do with me? I have my own problems. This statement makes me think about how life would be if every part of our bodies operated with that same attitude. For example, if the lungs were to say, so what if the heart is failing? What does it have to do with me? I have my own issues to deal with. This is an absurdity because every part of our body is interconnected and interdependent. If one part fails, the entire system is affected. I remember very clearly the inspiration behind the first sentence I just read. Specifically, sometimes when I hear people say, what if people in that area are ahead? What does it have to do with me? That was inspired by like a real life event. Didn't take long. It didn't happen too long ago. Like it's a very recent event that inspired that statement. I remember in my country, right? So there was this popular celebrity who was shot down, right? And as you can imagine, and the event that led to his death was very tragic and shocking, to say the least. And as you can imagine, this is a well-beloved celebrity, like a well-admired, personality who inspired many. And for his life to end, abruptly, especially in that kind of a shocking manner, sent shockwaves to the country. And, in the middle, as people were grieving, and people were still in shock, literally a few days later, there was an earthquake that hit another country that I won't mention now, but it was devastating. The earthquake was considered to be like one of the worst kind of a natural disaster in modern history. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed, and there was like shocking video footages, shown around in all social media platforms, and news agencies were portraying despair, images of despair, as you can imagine. And as I was scrolling through the various social medias in my country, there was a general sentiment of, okay, so that's very tragic what happened to that country, but listen, guys, we're still not over the shock of what happened to our celebrated celebrity here, and so there was this general sense of confusion. So do we stop mourning for our beloved patronage, or what do we do? Do we pause and do we pause our grieving and just start thinking about the people that were affected by the earthquake? Whilst many were, I guess, alluding to the idea that anyways, there's nothing that we can really do. There was a general sense of, we're sorry for the people of that country. But I think what shocked me was a very loud, there was a very unsettling, loud voice, let me just say theme, reoccurring theme in the comment sections of, well, at the end of the day, we are not in that country, so whatever is happening there is not necessary. It has nothing to do with us. Like, I'm not even exaggerating that. That's exactly how people are responding to the news in that country that was hit by the earthquake. And they were like, we're going through our own things here. Our celebrity just died in a horrific way. Let us mourn in peace. We don't have time, to think about the problems in that country anywhere besides. What can we do? Whilst it's true, considering the amount of tragedies that take place every day, not just in this country but around the world, one can say that to some extent people have become desensitized, right? But more than anything, people have become so desensitized that it has become kind of like an impossible task to expect sympathy for the tragedies that are taking place, because there's just not enough. Sometimes it feels like an impossible task to give your heart, your emotion, your thoughts to all the horrific things that are taking place. And to me, that is a perfect example of how disconnected or disjointed the population of the world has become, to a point whereby it's become so difficult for people to relate to tragedies or events of the world in a unified kind of way, to cope. People have had to kind of like create segments of or pockets of events, and the closest event to me, or the proximity of the tragedy, is the one that I'll give attention to, because it's closer to home than perhaps the one that's like a few kilometers away. And somehow it has become so ingrained into societal cultural paradigms, where, in a sense that, remember, once you start a certain behavioral pattern, it becomes ingrained into your cultural expression to a point whereby it becomes normalized, and then when something becomes normalized, it appears to be okay. It's almost like it's normal, so it's fine, it's okay. So it could be the most weirdest concept ever, but as soon as it's normalized, then it becomes okay. So I think people have become so desensitized to the pain and suffering, because it's been so much of it lately, that the best thing that people can do for themselves is to kind of like say, let me just deal with the immediate pain, the one that I'm dealing with right now. Hence why people felt like, it's easier for us to process the death of our celebrated patronage, rather than to give our attention to the hundreds of thousands of people that have died like so far away, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, concept. But nonetheless, what we do understand is that irrespective of how we feel about that, like, events, whether we ignore them, whether we kind of like suppress them, the truth of the matter is that everything is interconnected, and one way or another, every single tragic event or good event would impact you one way or another, irrespective of the proximity of the event. Like, it may be right here, right now, like something may be happening to you right now, it will affect you, or next door, or the next community, or the next village, or the next country. Irrespective of how you feel about it, it will affect you. And I think that's a fact that a lot of people have become numb towards, because it kind of like helps them feel better about themselves, or it makes them feel better about the amount, because then also I think it's related to a sense of control, because you feel like, at least if it's closer to me, I have a better opportunity of regulating or micromanaging, whatever event is taking place. Just because you have a sense of control over something makes no difference, even over the things that you don't have control over, because at the end of the day, one way or another, the things will affect you. So I think this is where this is coming from. Why I specifically wrote this paragraph in the book. It was inspired by that particular event. Now, if I could continue, We are all connected and our actions impact each other, whether we like it or not, at both the global scale and personal capacity. Ignoring the needs of others, including yourself, can lead to serious consequences for everyone, not just those directly involved. The interconnection between singularity and unity can also be seen in the example of atoms and cells. The core of all living organisms, there is a combination of elements in the form of atoms that combine to form molecules. These molecules then interact to form cells, which combine to form tissues and eventually an entire multicellular organism. Imagine that our source of material creation begins at levels even beyond our conceptualization from a perspective of the senses that we have. So if you cannot relate to the source of, now I'm just talking purely from the perspective of matter, the idea of your physical manifestation begins at such a microcellular level, but even before, even smaller than a microcellular level, it begins at a subatomic level. Our physical existence can be traced back to a subatomic level, a level beyond our sight, our hearing, well, at a carnal level, of course, all the senses that we can relate to right now, which is very interesting to me, because then one could say, where is the border? Where is the borderline to say that? So with regards to my physical existence, this is where I begin. That always used to intrigue me, because and even the language that's used, I sometimes blame. The language can become such a barrier. Just think about this. When we talk about atoms, the field of study is referred to as science. When we talk about cells, the field of study is referred to as biology. Just that differentiation it becomes a bit nonsensical, because when did the scholars or the academics decide that this is where we draw the line? Here to there, that's science. There to there, that's biology. Here to there. And it is all these segments of the conceptual segments that I think kind of created all these divisions or illusion of separation from not just each other, but even from things that we consider to be can you imagine if, for example, when you relate to yourself in a physical way, most times relate to themselves from a perspective of either pleasure or pain. So I will give my body attention when there is whatever physical needs, obviously normal things like hunger and thirst, etc. But I always used to ask myself, but then there's now there's this interest, so I'm feeling sick, there's medicine for stomach ache, I've got headache. But how, for example, in relation to sickness, how many people are willing to take it a bit deeper and saying, so how are my cells doing? How are my atoms doing? And I would say even deeper and deeper, and I think that's the great disconnect that, obviously, it's psychological. It starts from a psychological perspective, and then somehow ingrains itself internally, or it starts affecting our internal biological chemicals, for lack of a better word. By the way, I'm not a doctor, but it is just my suspicion, and more than anything, it is based on my own personal experiences, in that many times when I kind of changed my mind about things in relation to how I perceived situations, I would see changes almost instantly take place in my body, whether we talk about sickness, whether we talk about feelings, right? So sometimes I find myself in situations that require my immediate attention. So I'm I'm not feeling well. Something is bringing me down, and I find that, you know what? So most times before I started studying these things, when I was not feeling well, I would go deeper and deeper, just like a rabbit hole, you know, just this black hole of negativity that just used to pull me down, and you know, the more down I was, it would pull me even more down, you know. And these days I find that if something bothers me, it's all it takes is just me changing my mind about that. Obviously, there's still a lot that I have to learn, because remember, there's a lot of unlearning that I have to work through. But I'm saying the little that I have done has been so beneficial, not just to my health, but to my relationships, and my general worldview has improved significantly. But I see that what binds it all, like what binds the good experiences that I've had in most cases, is understanding the singularity of all physical existence. In a sense that when you can't just say that I am unified with my husband, my mother, my father, children, or family unit, it extends into other kinds of relationships, whether it's your friends, whether it's extended family, or you know, the community. Where do you draw the line? Just like I mentioned earlier, just like the cells and the atoms, where do you draw the lines when it comes to how you relate to humanity, or animals, or trees? Your empathy, where does your empathy, or where does your when you feel sorry, or when you relate to things in a way that you feel like you don't want to hurt them, that's really where I'm coming from. Where does it end? We know that first and foremost, you don't want to hurt yourself, unless you've got like suicidal tendencies, or you're going through mental challenges, you know. But generally, in a good state of mind, or a healthy state of mind, it is generally considered to be healthy when you advocate for continuity, for a sense of continuity, and that requires you to be kind to yourself, or to be generally when you do activities that encourage you to want to participate in this beautiful journey called life. But now, if you extend that, if you extend your desire for life, you extend it into those that you love. You don't want to lose things that you love, but the things that you love, or the concept of love, where do we draw that border in terms of like? So humans have this tendency to think that they can love like in the concentration, or in the form that they experience. It's very hard for them to relate to that concept outside of themselves. So there could be a love of animals, there could be a love of the environment, and many other things. So, and as soon as you start putting love into the equation, not as a feeling, but love as a concept, of a practical concept of that could be applied in preserving the right of existence to any being, you know, that for me is a great sign of understanding just how connected we all are, not just with ourselves, but with the universe in general, or with the earth in general, or with the ocean, with the trees. If you understand just how interconnected we all are, the concept of oneness brings into the equation the desire for equilibrium amongst all things, both living and not living. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Because I'm saying not living because in a way, until you are clear about who you really are, or what you really are, I think we should also be careful about what we consider to be sentient or not sentient, because that term has caused a lot of problems. I think, once again, this is just my opinion, in extending our loving ways to the entire planet. I don't know, it's just my personal opinion, by the way. And I feel that when I started kind of like applying those ideas within my head, the idea of oneness, it has significantly made my life so much better. The level of anxiety, I used to have immense anxiety, it's gone down. I feel a bit more liberated internally. I feel a bit more free, to be myself, because I don't necessarily feel a threat. Because generally, I don't know about you, you always get what you give. So when you open yourself up, you find that the world opens itself up too. And there's a general sense of feeling secure, because anxiety is generally having a lot of doubt about people's intentions, or even one could say the intentions of life. You'll be like, man, why am I here? Am I here just to suffer? Everybody is against me. This air is against me. Everything is against you when you're kind of like in that state of contraction, when you feel contracted. So yeah, so that's more or less what this series is about, breaking the bonds of matter. And thank you so much for tuning in. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. By the way, this is just an excerpt from the chapter 7 of the book. It goes on and on and on. And I think in closing, I would just like to read this part. Awareness is a powerful force that influences the way that we think and feel, shaping our perceptions and attitude in subtle and profound ways. It is why we have so much to say about each other and everything, as we are all connected through this greater awareness. Whether we are conscious of it or not, this connection is a constant presence in our lives, guiding us and shaping our experiences in ways we may not even be aware of.
Breaking the bounds of matter. A fresh perspective on spirituality. Get instant access to Breaking the Bounds of Matter by clicking the link below in both PDF and EPUB formats, and start your journey towards self-realization today.